and people were waiting. All of a sudden, the cloud came in front of the sun, and out of the cloud came a metallic object. And the metallic object began to spin and fall to the earth and like a leaf, and then go back up. It did this 3 times, and then it did.
Of the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Sam Johnston. Over the past couple months, we've seen some crazy things going on. We've seen an eclipse, we've seen a giant hurricane, we've seen a rise in UFO activity. So who else to come and bring on the show than Mr. L.A. Marzulli? Mr. Marzulli is a best-selling author of the Nephilim Trilogy, Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural, and the Alien Interviews. He has appeared on hundreds of radio and television shows. And if you haven't heard of him, congratulations on living under a rock for the last 10 years. He's on the cutting edge of research that has been super valuable to anyone trying to find out what's really going on in the world. So, Mr. Marzulli, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Sam. Thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, welcome back. First time I get to interview, but it's your third time on the show, so I appreciate you coming back. And I know you're just coming off of the Hear the Watchman conference. How was that?
That was incredible. You know, it's Mike and Jeannie Kerr have just done a wonderful job. Dallas, and then we were up in Boise, Idaho. But I've been in every Hear the Watchman conference that they put on, and they just get better and better. And it's always good to see the folks and hear some of the speakers. You know, Paul Begley, Russ Dizdar hit it out of the park. Scotty Clark did a great presentation on the Revelation 12 sign. I don't necessarily agree with everything that he, put forth, but he was very, it was his first time with public speaking, and he absolutely did fantastic. So, bully for him. Again, I just want to make it real clear. I don't think, and I respect him. I really do. I respect him. He's a good guy. He's got a heart for the Lord. Mm-hmm. I'm just not down with that. This is the sign of the church going up. I believe in the doctrine of imminence, which means that rapture could happen anytime. And this goes back to the early church in the first century. There was a writings called the Didache, and basically it stated these are the early church fathers. I mean, this is and they were into the doctrine of imminence. They expected his return. In other words, there's nothing that has to happen for him to come back, for him to take us out of here. And I'll be actually talking about that tonight on Coast to Coast. So that'll be interesting.
Very cool. Well, I know in Scott's presentation, he spent a lot of time in Revelation 12, and I know you wanted to talk about that tonight, so I'm going to just turn it over to you. How does Revelation 12 relate to our situation today, especially with the hurricane?
Well, I mean, there's some really interesting things in it, and we got to remember that we're told from Matthew 24 and the Luke passage and the Synoptic Gospels and, Matthew, Mark, Luke, basically that there's a certain punch list that we need to be aware of that's going to happen right before his coming, and these are the birth pangs. And I've been saying this for years. I truly believe we are in the season known as the birth pangs, which lead to, well, what is it, birth? 2 things. The church goes up, they show up, and then that bursts the tribulation. Once the church is out of here, the tribulation starts. And what's amazing, recently, some guy wrote me this long, nasty letter about how I'm way off base with my pre-tribulation, and we're going to go through it. The tribulation, got to brace yourself, LA. The people have been persecuted, the saints have been persecuted for thousands of years. All the apostles were beheaded, and I wrote the guy back, and this I felt was from the Holy Spirit. I wrote the guy back, and I said, yeah, I get that. We live in the kingdom of the God of this world, who was Satan. So there's persecution from him. But that's not what the tribulation is. The tribulation is the wrath of God. And we are not appointed to wrath. End of story. End of story. People can think, we're gonna tough it out and go. No, you're not. The persecution of man, the church has been persecuted. I get that. We're being persecuted right now on YouTube. Stuff's being demonetized all the time. I get that. That's a form of persecution. We're living under that. We're living in a society that can't stand traditional values, can't stand the name of Jesus, that blasphemes it every chance that they get. But we're not appointed to the wrath of God. And this is a whole different deal. The tribulation period is a completely different deal than anything this planet has ever gone through, which is why Jesus warns us that unless those days were shortened, no flesh would survive. I mean, that is to me, that is the most chilling statement in the entire book. That's it. Unless those days were shortened, no flesh would survive. So, when we look, and let's walk through it. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, moon under her feet, and on her head were a crown of 12 stars. There are basically three interpretations of this. Catholic believes that the woman is Mary, and they're entitled to believe what they want to believe. There are some that believe that the woman clothed with the sun is Israel, and that's the belief that I hold to, and the 12 stars are the 12 tribes. There are others who say that the women clothed with the sun is actually the church, which I don't believe. And then it says, she was pregnant, was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared, a whole a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. And so we know what happens. His tail swept down a third of the stars in heaven and cast them to earth. The dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child who is to rule and all the nations with a rod of iron. That cannot be the church. You see, this is where it goes off the rails. When we actually look at the scripture and read it in toto, in its entirety, what we see is that she brings forth a male child to rule the nations with a rod of iron. There's only one, and it's singular. It's not corporate, in my opinion. We're talking about Jesus coming through, which is what we know. And guess who was waiting? The enemy was waiting there. He knew it was going to happen. He wasn't sure exactly where and how. But this is why Herod dispatches his goons, and they kill everybody from 2 years old out. And then what's interesting, she goes, and we know that Joseph and Mary and Jesus fled to Egypt, and they stood there. Now, we don't know how long they were there for. I mean, that would be a real interesting study, and I just haven't time to do it. But now it's future again. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God. So it also says the child was caught up into his throne. So that's where it goes off the rails. The whole Revelation 12 sign for me. The child is singular. It's not corporate, in my opinion, and it's talking about Jesus being caught up, and all that to me points to the Messiah, points to his first coming, and points to what's happening. But then it gets really interesting. We've been in war. There's been a battle. I've written about this in my book, The Cosmic Chess Match. There's been a battle raging in this unseen dimension, literally for millennia. And we see it manifest from time to time on the earth. We do. The entire earth is under the sway of the fallen cherub, Satan, Satan. I mean, there's no doubt about that. We, you, me, every person listening, every person that's ever been born, with the exception of Jesus, has the sin code in them. End of story. We have the sin code. That was not there until Adam and Eve. It wasn't there. The sin code, which leads to death, was not there. The whole miracle of being born again and spirit-filled is that we are now, the sin code is overcome by the Spirit of a living God. And we move away from that sin code. And eventually, when we're taken up, we'll be new bodies, and that sin code will no longer have any effect on us at all. But in the meantime, we're here, stuck on this little blue sphere. And what's interesting about this, and I say this at pretty much every place that I've been this year, if we are intellectually honest, nobody has any idea of what this is and where we are. Nobody has any idea. No one. And what I mean by that, let's take the United States, and we'll say that the United States is analogous to the entire universe, okay? Are we in Minneapolis? Are we in, Tampa, Florida? Are we in Dallas? I hope we're not in Houston. Are we in Los Angeles? Get where I mean? No one knows where we are. No one knows what this thing is, how it got here. I mean, all these scientists make these huge claims. Oh, they're universal billion. No one has any idea of what this really is and what we really are in relation to it. And this is why when we are visited by the angelic host of heaven, which happens all the way through the biblical prophetic narrative, people do face plants. People are sprung out of prison. We see the miraculous happen. We see the physics, our physics, completely transcended in ways that stupefy us. You know, when Moses takes his staff and raises that staff and the waters part like this, that's real. It's not some nonsense. Well, you know, there was the Reed Sea and there was a landslide further up. No. The waters stood up as a heap. Read the story. They stood up as a heap and the people went off on dry land. And for those, there's a book that's out. I won't tell you the title because I don't want people to get it. But this guy's, you know, telling us that all the miracles of the Bible were done by E.T. and flying saucers. Once again, you know, it all goes back to E.T. So I'm a frank supernaturalist. Let me get a slurp. And I believe in the miracles of the Bible are literal. So when Moses does that, the waters do stand up as a heap and everybody goes walking through. What's so hard about that? But then when Jesus is here, he feeds 5,000 people. How does he do that? With a few fish and a couple of loaves. How does he do that? He transcends time, space, matter, and energy. And that's why I look at that as a frank supernaturalist. And so when I read about war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon and his angels fought back, but the dragon is defeated. And there was no longer any place, and the great dragon was thrown down. The ancient serpent was called the devil and Satan to deceive their whole world. He was thrown down to earth. And this is what I said. I love this verse. Now the salvation and power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down. Then it says, rejoice, O heavens, but woe to the earth. For the devil has come down to you in great wrath because he knows his time is short. And then he pursues the woman who has given birth to the male child. That's Israel. And a place is prepared for her. And she goes, and I believe it, that's Petra. And she goes for 3.5 years. That's the back end of the tribulation. And, you know, she's held somehow supernaturally away from the dragon. And then it says at the very end of that, then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimonies of Jesus. These are the tribulation saints. Look, it's very complex. It's very complex. I don't have all the answers. Nobody does. I could be wrong about certain things, and I'm willing to admit that. But that is how I see it right now. So the bottom line for me is, for those of you like the flat earthers out there, with all due respect, I'm working actually with a surveyor right now. This guy's a professional surveyor. He's also a pilot. And we're going to do a presentation showing the mathematical curvature of the earth and why it's there, and why you have to figure the curvature of the earth. If you fly an airplane, you don't figure the curvature of the earth, you don't wind up where you think you're going to go. You wind hundreds, if not thousands of miles away from your destination. So this is like aviation 101, and we're trying to work on a time to kind of fit all this together. But look, a lot of people believe that September 23rd, we're going to be out of here, the Feast of the Trumpets and all this. And I get that. It all sounds really good. And I don't want to disparage anyone's belief. All I'm saying is prepare to be here on the 24th. And don't be bummed out when you're here on the 24th. Understand that we've heard this with Harold Camping, who predicted that the rapture was going to happen several years ago. It didn't. We heard it from an author who wrote a book, 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Will Happen in 1988. And I was there when all that happened, and rapture fever was everywhere. And from that 88 Reasons Why the Rapture, that's what spawned the whole mid-trib pre-wrath thing. Because now we know that there's no pre-tribulation, so it's going to happen midway through the tribulation, so don't worry about it. And that's how all that came about, as a rebuttal to this guy who wrote this ridiculous book, 88 Reasons. Again, going back to this ancient manuscript, which is written in the 1st century, the Didache, the early church fathers and those who were under the apostles believed in the doctrine of imminence. In other words, there's nothing that has to happen for the rapture to happen. They were all expectant. They believed the Lord's return was imminent. And I believe it's imminent too. I believe we're on the cusp of something. It can't go on and continue the way it has. It just can't. So something has got to give at some point.
Wow, that was a lot in a very short period of time, but that was awesome. Quick question, kind of going back to Revelation 12 and specifically verse 5. It talks about the son gave birth, she gave birth to a son and the male child who will rule all nations with an iron scepter. And I was looking into it and give credit to my sister who came up with this. Harvey actually comes from an old Breton name that means iron. Do you think that plays into maybe the end kind of coming near, or maybe just a change in the way God is working?
I think it's a stretch. I think that what we're seeing with Harvey, these are the signs of the times. What we're seeing is the waves roaring, the seas roaring. I mean, earthquakes in diverse places, troublesome times, wars and rumors of wars. Think of Kim Jong-un, launching yet another ballistic missile over Japan. I mean, the guy's a lunatic. He's a lunatic, and he's worshipped as a god, which is even worse. So, I mean, you're looking at a really crazy dynamic, and that's just one place. You got a map on your back wall. I mean, look at Venezuela, completely imploding. Thank you, socialism. It's not working. Look at the drug cartels. Look at the body count in Mexico from the drug cartels. There are more people dead in Mexico. This year, it's already, tipped the scales with record killing, than Iraq and Afghanistan put together. Don't go to Mexico, folks. Trust me. You're taking your life in your hands. And you look at what's happening in other places in the world. Look at the anti-fascist movement in the United States, which, by the way, is right out of the communist playbook, right out of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. And the problem is these people who stand up and say, we got to take down these Confederate statues. Well, last week on Acceleration Radio, which, by the way, was demonetized, more than likely for this comment, so this will probably demonetize you too.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I said, looked right at the camera and saying, you're right. Some of these people were just horrible people. And, this is our history, and we have to erase the past so we can create a new glorious future. Welcome to the Soviet Union in 1917. That's exactly what they did. Welcome to Adolf Hitler. That's exactly what they did. Those are the real Nazis. So, George Washington was a slave owner. I get that. He's on the face of every $1 bill. Send those $1 bills to me. I will take care of them for you. I'll make sure that they're put to good use. Because, these people are so insulted by George Washington. Oh, Andrew Jackson on the 20, another slave owner. Send those 20s to me. I'll take care of them for you.
You know what?
I mean,
I'll take the 5.
Absurd.
I'll take the 5 with Lincoln and his original 13th Amendment. I'll take all the 5s my way. But yeah, no, definitely, it's insane how our world is just heading. I mean, it's insane at one point, but the other part, you kind of look at Scripture and it's like, well, God said it was going to happen. So what can we do as Christians to fall in the line of God's will, but also stand up against this evil that's rising?
Put on our armor every day. Be bold, adventurous, and daring. Don't be afraid to share the gospel. I'm going to share the gospel on Coast to Coast tonight. I'm going to tell people, in your face. I've been on this show for 17 years and counting. And, every time I'm on, I talk about Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. And what people need to understand is we are in a window of time where, there might not be that much time left. I mean, look, it's like this. There's a parting. There's a parting. And the radicals and the crazy worldly people are getting crazier by the day. And Christians, I mean, there's a pulling away. There is. I mean, someone stands up and yells, no police, no borders, no constitution, no this. Well, what are we going to replace that with? And then just like the YouTube where I was demonetized, who made that decision? Who made that decision at YouTube that they demonetized mine, also take out Timothy Alberino's entire YouTube channel, take down 1,400 YouTube videos and demonetize those from Hagman and Hagman? Who made that decision? And why did they make that decision? And what worldview are they promulgating to make that decision? And the fact that free speech is free only when it agrees with them, and that's the problem. Even the First Amendment applies to everyone, including someone who stands up like a KKK guy and yells and screams about racists. You can't shut him up either. You can't. All you can do is go against him and say, you, sir, and your dialogue, your vituperative remarks, look that one up, your vituperative remarks have no place in America. But he has the right to stand up and say that by the First Amendment. He does. Well, I might not like what he says, but he might not like what I say. He might not like me talking about Jesus, and that if you have hate for your brother, then you're going to hell, pal. That's the bottom line. Because you can't have hate and love God at the same time. That won't work. He might not want to hear that, but I have just as much right to say that as the guy in the KKK has as much right to do what he's going to do. And the moment we start picking and choosing, we're down a slippery slope. Because then you've got to set up a group of people who are going to arbitrate, what speech we're going to, and this is exactly what's happening with Google, with YouTube, with the internet, everywhere. And the idiots and the anti-fascist movement, because they've been raised up in the school system, which doesn't teach anything anymore, no sense of history, they have no idea of what they're doing. None. Zippo. Nada. The fact that someone stands up and goes, we need to defend our borders. And then you get some knucklehead transgender like Chelsea Manning, who can take all the hormones that he wants to, can remove his plumbing surgically, and can do all that he wants to do. His DNA, unfortunately, will always show that he is a male. So he can go through the charade just like Bruce Jenner, and all these people need our prayers. I mean, I get that. They can do whatever they want. People have the right to do whatever they want to do. Who am I to say what people can or cannot do? All I'm saying is it doesn't work. You're lying to yourself, and there's a supernatural basis behind the whole transgender movement. And that has to do with the fallen angels, because the fallen angels are obsessed with the female form, which is why there's a word that Russ Dizdar taught me, metaskitsmodicai, which means the ability to transform into anything that they want to. Do we really think that the goddess Diana, who had breasts and then below the breasts are sets of testicles? That's what they are in the original statues. She's a twisted abomination, a hermaphroditic thing from the second heaven. And these angels, these fallen angelic hosts, are obsessed with this. This is why this whole transgender thing is being pushed. And you must accept this. No, I don't have to accept it. I will pray for Mr. Jenner. I will pray for Mr. Manning. But I'm not going to accept it as something normal, because it's not. If he walked right in, I'd go, hey, Bruce, how you doing? Or hi, Caitlin, how you doing? I wouldn't shun him. I wouldn't shun Manning. I would show the love of Jesus to these people. That's what we're called to do. I might be shocked. And by the way, I actually was in a parking lot, and he came walking in a full dress with the heels and the whole thing about a year ago. And I was sitting in my car. He was sitting in his car. We had eye contact. He lives in the same canyon that I do. So I see him, frequently. And I pray for the guy. I think he's troubled and confused, but I digress. So Manning, Chelsea Manning, not his real name, tells us that we should have no borders, no police, no prisons. Well, what are we supposed to do, Chelsea? And how does this world look? No borders. Let me see. So we've got illegal aliens coming across a porous southern border. And yet if you stand up and go, maybe we shouldn't be doing this, bam, you're labeled a racist. I'm so sick of all these people using the term racist and Nazi when they have no idea what these terms really mean. So first of all, someone standing up and defending the border like our President Trump wants to do is not a racist. Because, and I've said this over and over again, you want to see the way it works? Let's get a busloads of anti-Fa guys, right? And we'll bus them over the border and have them right into Mexico City. Hi, no borders. Here we are. We want citizenship. Kumbaya. Of course, they wouldn't be singing that. Let's see what the Mexican government does to these people. Right in the Huskow they go. Right in prison they go, and they're deported. There's nothing. There's no talking. Oh, and is the Mexican government racist for kicking all the whiteys out? I mean, this is how wacky our country has become. No police force. Go to Chicago on the weekend, Mr. Manning. Go to Chicago. Go to a border town on the Texas-Mexican border on the weekend. And you tell me, do you really want to have no police around? I mean, that's basically what Chicago is now. It's a murder capital of the world. So you go to, a border town, El Paso's a good one, and you'll hear the gunshots every weekend as the cartels battle it out. And the police battle it out with them. We have a police force in every single country, in every single town, pretty much all over the world. Why? Because the heart of man is deceitfully wicked. That is why. Because the sin code will always be there. And what do we see in Houston? What do we see in Houston? I mean, LA, people are basically good. Nonsense. Just look at what's going on in Houston. Already the looting is starting. Already the criminal element rises. Yeah, see, how can I make a fast buck here? See, price gouging a case of bottled water for $99. Shame on these people. Shame on these people. Instead of pulling the resources together to try to make a fast buck. That's the heart of man, deceitfully wicked.
Yeah, I think when things like this come up, it really shows the duality of our culture in the fact that there are a group of people that are out there selfishly looking for what they can get, and then there are a small group of people out there, giving all they got to help people. So you can definitely see the divide, like you talked about, so obvious when things like this happen. Transitioning, I do want to talk about your upcoming movie about Fatima. Can we transition there? What is Fatima?
We went to Portugal, and the reason why we went to Portugal was we were working on another film. And what I mean by that, we had started filming. We actually had interviews in the can. We were excited by it. And the Lord, I was getting dressed for coming over to the studio one day, and the Lord just gave me one word. He said, Fatima. I just went, oh my gosh. And I went into my wife, and she was putting on her makeup in the bathroom, and I went in and I said, honey, we're going to Portugal. We're going to Fatima. And resources came in, and we were able to do so. We spent almost 2 weeks there, and what we saw and what we interviewed, the people that we interviewed, was absolutely incredible. And there are basically two Fatimas. And again, people have the right to believe what they want to believe. And I'm not going to disparage that in any way. If people want to believe in Miracle of the Sun, it was Mary the Bible, knock yourself out. I mean, I'm going to tell you why I don't if you're interested, but we're not going to disparage that. We're not going to go on a witch hunt and say this, and this. We're not going to do that. But what we did do is we discussed and talked to many experts who had been poring over the 1917 documents. So it's 2017, it's the 100th year anniversary when the apparition started in May 13th and ended in October 13th. And the apparitions ended in October 13th, which is a misnomer, called the Miracle of the Sun. And the first thing we have to address, and I'm actually working on a paper, which will probably be in Prophecy Watchers next month, but it'll also be in my news magazine. The Miracle of the Sun is a misnomer. A reporter named the phenomena that was experienced by upwards of 70,000 people in Fatima a Miracle of the Sun, because they didn't know what to call it. And in 1917, in the lexicon, there were no words for UFO or flying saucer. Okay? So he calls it the Miracle of the Sun. And what we have to understand is the sun, if the sun is the size of a watermelon, the earth is the size of a match head. Watermelon, match head. So the sun did not come to earth. If the sun left its position in the solar system, all hell would have been it. Everything would have been destroyed. It wasn't the sun. What people wrote in the eyewitness testimonies from 1917, they wrote this, that it had been raining all day, the clouds parted, and the sun showed up. And people were waiting. All of a sudden, the cloud came in front of the sun, and out of the cloud came a metallic object. And the metallic object began to spin and fall to the earth and like a leaf, and then go back up. It did this 3 times, and then it did what was known as a flyby. It came over the crowd like this, went back into the cloud, and vanished. People looked up and saw a dull silver disc. What does that sound like to you? We have a priest who was there at Fatima, who in 1977 was still alive, not that long, well, it's a long time ago actually, but he wrote a testimony. The disc turned into a tan color. He calls it a disc, and we use that little clip. He's speaking in Portuguese. We had got it translated, and he says, the disc turned to a tan color. And we were so afraid that it was going to crush us. So in 1917, people have never seen an airplane. Most of the people standing in that field had never seen an airplane, even a dirigible. There are no planes in Portugal, maybe one or two in Lisbon. So people have never seen an airplane. So all of a sudden something pops out of the sky and goes over the heads of these people. And it's not the sun, it's actually a swath of people. And this is where it goes off the rails. And we're going to talk about this in part 2. The clothes are dry. There are skin burns on people. The hoods of cars pop open. The engines spontaneously combust. Windshields are cracked. People thought it was the end of the world. Does that sound like, the God of the Bible or something else? And that's why we call it, miracle of the sun, or a harbinger of deception. Because what people don't get is the people that were in that field, the 70,000 people that were there, their worldview was changed. Their paradigm was rocked in an instant. And people didn't know what to make of it. So that's what the film really focuses on.
Yeah, and when you're doing your research on this topic of Fatima, there's a lot of key words that kind of stand out to point to maybe it's more of a deception than what it's being portrayed to be. I mean, the miracle of the sun, you can point to all what the sun god is and all of that. All the fact that the 3 children witnessing the apparitions died, later that year, so they couldn't tell the story again. There's a lot of iffy things that kind of go when your conspiratorial mind kind of peaks up and you're like, wait, I'm not quite sure about that. So I definitely agree.
Two of the children passed within a few years. Lucia, the third, and they were 10. Lucia was 10, the eldest. Francisco was 9. Jacinta was 7 when the apparitions happened. So Francisco and Jacinta died shortly after of the flu epidemic that hit Europe and the whole area. But Lucia, she was 10 when it happened. At 16, she was hustled off to a convent, given a vow of silence, and no one heard from her for about 15 years. And this is when the so-called secrets are finally written down. So in the 1917 interviews, Lucia never mentions Russia. Never mentions Russia. It's not there. So we've got 2 Fatimas. We have the Fatima that people have been told, and the reality, in my opinion, which goes back to the 1917 records.
So, in an effort to try to tie these 2 topics that we've talked about together, do you believe that Fatima was maybe a trial run or a kind of like a good example to look for when we look for like the coming alien deception, as you talk about in a lot of your books and different interviews? Do you think that the Fatima would be a good representative of what could come?
I think that when they show up, it's all bets are off. And it's taken me over 20 years to get my head around this, to come up with a solution. Because in the 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 passage, it says, "Do not be troubled by word or deed, whenever the day of the Lord has come and our gathering to him," harpazo, rapture. That day will not happen until the apostasia in Greek, the apostasy occurs. Then the son of perdition. So that from that day to the son of perdition, the Antichrist appears. Is it an hour? Is it a day? Is it a week? We're not told. It's an unspecified period of time. The problem is there's a word there, apostasy, and it has a dual meaning. And up until fairly recently, I have wrestled with this for years. Does it mean departure, harpazo, rapture, or does it mean falling away, apostasy, or does it mean both? And now what I realize, and again, I'm not saying this lightly. I have wrestled with this and read a lot of different commentaries, and I've never heard anyone put it like this. Gary Stearman agrees with me on this, if I can be so bold as to state that. And I actually said it on his show. And I coined the phrase, and I said it on Gary's Prophecy Watcher show. It was the first time I ever say it. We go up, they show up. We go up, they come down. When you think about it, out of the 1.8 billion Christians, how many are born again and spirit-filled? How many so-called Christians on the planet are born again and spirit-filled? It's not many. It's a very, very small remnant. You can reduce it further. If you go to church, I don't care what denomination, Catholic, Protestant, Methodist, if you're not born again and spirit-filled, it's all rote. You might as well just shave your head and become a Buddhist. It's all the same thing. There's no connection there. No connection. So unless a person be born again, not my words, his words, Jesus' words, they cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoa, what are we talking about? And guess what? The harpazo, the rapture, is entering the kingdom of heaven. That's what that is. We are entering the kingdom of heaven when we rise to meet the Lord in the air. So something is restraining this cat and mouse game that we have seen literally for decades. They never show up, and there's a reason for it. They can't. The protocols of the heavenly war are restraining these entities until the restrainer is taken out of the way. All hell breaks loose. We go up, they come down. We go up, they show up. And that's what I now firmly believe.
Yeah, and I think as Christians, our job is to step into that battle. And I mean, honestly, I'm only 24, so I want to keep that restrainer on a little bit longer, as long as we can, and fight that battle so we can, take back our country and our world and spend some more time glorifying God and turn things around. Do you think that's possible for us to do that?
Well, I think everywhere I go, people have had it with the deep state. People have had it with giving all of our hard-earned money in taxes to a bloated federal government. People have had it with the Mitch McConnells, Nancy Pelosi's, Paul Ryan's. I mean, they've had it. John McCain's. They just had it. And this is why we need term limits. The deep state, people don't understand what the deep state is. And Eisenhower pointed it to it, that the military-industrial complex was left over from World War II. That has never been deposed. And then the agencies of the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, all just mushroomed into these little corporate fiefdoms, which is what they are. And that is the deep state. That's why it doesn't matter who gets elected. They're running the country. They're running the country. And they have an agenda. You better believe they have an agenda. So with prayer, anything is possible. Anything is possible. And look, I believe that Trump was put in office as a sort of a reprise for us, if I can use those words. Had Hillary gotten in, everything would be completely different now. We'd be on a fast track to globalism, the transgender stuff through the roof, more refugees from Middle Eastern countries that harbor terrorism. It just, everything, abortion on demand, possibly partial birth abortion reinstated. I mean, all hell would have broken loose. And that didn't happen. And yet the media had her up by 4, 5, 10, 15 points for the 3 months before the election. There was only one paper that called it. That was the LA Times, believe it or not. And this guy said Trump up by 3. And he was right. Trump won. And the reason why he won is because people are tired of the nonsense. The problem is that the media, which is basically another leg of a Democratic Party, is in the tank with the Democrats. And the deep state, so these two huge forces, the mainstream media and the deep state, are in cahoots with each other to impeach Trump, to get him out of there. If they impeach Trump, if they try to depose him, that would, in my opinion, certainly could create a great amount of unrest like we have never seen in this country. We're talking about something that I think would overshadow what we saw with the riots during the Martin Luther King era. People are going to push back. People aren't stupid. And this is what I'm afraid of.
That's going to be an interesting time, and I look forward to I look forward to not letting that happen, but then if things like that does happen, I look forward to standing up, and fighting for the gospel and our free speech, because it's clearly being attacked.
It is. And people don't understand that the Constitution was written. They don't understand history. They don't understand how we got where we are. They don't. Are there problems with this country? Yeah, but you want to go to Venezuela? You know, why not go to North Korea and live under Kim Jong-un? I mean, why do people flee to this country and not the former Soviet Union? Hello, McFly. I mean, people need to, they need to get it. They need to understand what's going on. And there's no sense of history. It's just, all these white guys are bad. Well, no, all these white guys really aren't that bad, because a lot of these white guys gave us our Constitution, which is, in my opinion, outside of the Bible, the greatest document ever penned by men. End of story.
I definitely agree, and we need to fight for it. Watch out, globalists. Watch out, New World Order. L.A. Marzulli is fired up, and he's coming after, and he's not going to let you take it away. So you better watch out. So, Mr. Marzulli, where can people find you? Thank you so much for coming on the show. What do you got up next? Where can people find you?
Well, the Fatima movie will be released. You can go to thewatchmanchronicles.com, thewatchmanchronicles.com. You can download or just watch the trailer. I think this film's really going to take off. We are the only evangelical outlet that I'm aware of that is dealing with Fatima. And the reason why we're doing it is because Father God redirected our steps. That's why we're doing it. The film is done. It's in duplication. We'll be mailing it out in September, and it's going to heat up. This whole Fatima thing is going to heat up. Mark my words. And people are going to be talking about it. Oh, the miracle of the sun. And we have the only film. We actually traveled there. We were there. We talked to the people. We talked to people that had access to the sanctuary, to the 1917 records. And what we discovered there was absolutely mind-boggling. TheWatchmanChronicles.com. Check out the trailer. Support what we do. Get a couple of copies of the film. I promise you won't be sorry.
And you got a podcast on YouTube as well?
Yeah, that's on KGRA. That will happen in basically a little over an hour from now. And I filmed that in my TV studio here and then put that up on my YouTube channel. And of course, last week was demonetized because we were talking about the deep state and, the anti-FA movement, the anti-fascist movement, and all this other nonsense. So, but we continue to do what we're doing, and that'll be up probably on Thursday. We'll have that edited and up on YouTube.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, and everyone, you heard it. You got to know what's going on. You have to understand how Revelation fits into our world today. You have to understand how our history and things like Fatima can apply to things in the future. It's so important to do your research. Tune into what Mr. Marzulli is doing. Buy his movie. I'm sure it's going to be spectacular. His past work has been nothing less than astounding. So please go support him. Give him all your Washingtons and all your Jacksons. If you don't want him, if you find him racist, pass him on to him. And thank you so much for coming back into the Sharpening Report. We have some great things planned for the rest of the month, and I look forward to doing this next time. Have a great week.
The producers of this film realizes that this work may be deemed controversial, even before watching what it will reveal. We want to state here that we are not going to disparage anyone's belief system on any account. That is not our intention. That being said, millions of people gather at Fatima every year making pilgrimages there. Millions of Muslims encircle the Kaaba stone in Mecca. Hindus celebrate Guru Puja. Buddhists worship at thousands of temples. People have the right to believe what they want to, and we respect the rights of those who may have different beliefs than we do. Thus, while this film is about the events of Fatima, which happened 100 years ago, we will focus primarily on the phenomena of October 13, 1917, which has become to be known as the miracle of the sun. You will hear from a variety of scientists, scholars, theologians, historians, researchers, and others who will weigh in on the events of October 13th. We will present the facts, mostly taken from the 1917 original documents, and interrogation of the many witnesses who were present at Fatima.